So picture this. You're standing in front of a room full of English language learners. You toss out what seems like an incredibly simple question, and you're met with absolute pin drop silence. We've all been there, right? It's just this visceral, agonizing feeling. You can literally hear the clock ticking, the awkwardness is just hanging heavy in the air, and you instantly start questioning your entire lesson plan. Look, it's a really tough spot to be in. But today, we're diving into a practical explainer designed to tackle this exact universal issue. We are going to unpack a comprehensive teacher's toolkit to help you transform those hesitant, quiet ESL students into confident, active speakers. Let's get right into it.
Let's take a super quick look at our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be covering the silent classroom, icebreakers and confidence, interactive tasks, real-world prep, and finally, objective evaluation.
Starting right off with Section 1, the silent classroom. So, how do you actually get a silent ESL class talking? Like I said, it's the universal struggle every single language instructor faces. You ask a question, and nobody wants to answer. Now, as our source material highlights, this usually isn't because they don't know the vocabulary or the grammar. No, it stems from a profound, deeply rooted fear of making mistakes. Think about that one student you've definitely had who just completely aces every single written test. I mean, they know the mechanics of the language perfectly on paper. But the second you ask them to speak out loud, they completely freeze up. The pressure mounts, they worry about sounding foolish, they stumble, they fall back on their native language, and ultimately, they just clam up. So the big question is, how do we dismantle that invisible barrier?
There's this quote from our source material that I absolutely love. It says, "When it comes to speaking, confidence is the key, password, login, and biometric security." And wow, that just perfectly captures the core truth we have to accept as educators. Think of it quite literally like the Face ID on your phone. Just as your face is the only biological key that unlocks your device, confidence is the biological key that unlocks a student's vocal cords. Before we even begin to stress about perfect grammar or super advanced vocabulary, we absolutely have to establish that baseline of confidence. That is the foundational step to fluency. If they aren't confident, the words simply will not come out. It really is that simple.
So, let's open up the toolkit. Section 2, icebreakers and confidence.
When we're talking about building confidence, there are a few ground rules we have to establish from day one. First and foremost, you've got to forget the errors early on. Seriously, just be thrilled that they're using English at all. Imagine the immense psychological relief a student feels when they nervously string together a totally broken sentence, maybe entirely in the present tense, and instead of you instantly halting them to correct a verb conjugation, you just smile, nod, and genuinely engage with their idea. That validation is massive. Second, give them topics they are total experts on. And what's everyone an expert on? Themselves. We all love talking about our own lives. You can even provide visual cues like drawing a life map on the board to outline influences, hobbies, and interests. It gives them a familiar template to work from. And finally, the most powerful tool in your entire kit. Smile, be patient, and then smile again. A warm, genuine smile provides positive reassurance and just miraculously lowers the anxiety level in the room.
A really fantastic low-stakes icebreaker to actually put this into practice is the Find Someone Who activity. Picture this in your classroom. Instead of sitting rigidly at their desks, your students are up and moving around. They're mingling and asking simple, modeled questions like, "Do you like soccer?" or "Have you ever driven a sports car?" trying to find peers who can answer yes. Now, at first, there's always that initial awkwardness. But within minutes, as they discover shared interests and realize the stakes are incredibly low, that tension just completely melts away into laughter. It gets the blood flowing, it lowers the collective anxiety, and it gets everyone talking in a very safe, structured environment.
The source material we're diving into today is just packed with an incredible arsenal of engaging tasks, exactly like that one. From role plays to drama exercises, you really do have access to highly creative alternatives to just, reading aloud from a boring course book. Honestly, it's profoundly liberating to realize you aren't chained to a textbook. You absolutely don't have to throw your curriculum out the window, but you can seamlessly adapt those rigid topics into dynamic, interactive speaking tasks that actually breathe life into your classroom.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, interactive tasks.
Traditional language teaching, well, it relies heavily on rote memorization and endless repetition drills. But the communicative method, which our sources strongly advocate for, completely flips this paradigm on its head. Instead of just memorizing isolated lists of verbs, the communicative method uses spontaneous, real-life simulations. And think about why this works for a second. Spontaneous simulations spark genuine motivation because they feel like real-world survival rather than some sterile academic test. It provides varied, totally unpredictable outcomes depending on how students react to one another, and that forces them to actively listen and communicate in truly meaningful ways.
One brilliant technique for this is called strategic interaction. Basically, it combines group discussion with role play, but it adds this one vital ingredient: conflicting agendas. So, for example, imagine dividing your class in half. One group advises a student who's playing a desperate tenant who simply cannot pay rent this month. Meanwhile, the other group advises a student playing a notoriously strict landlord. Now, only one person from each group actually performs the role play, but everyone else rehearses, strategizes, and feeds them arguments in a safe group environment beforehand. The humor and the high stakes of these conflicting agendas make it incredibly engaging. Plus, the group preparation makes it super safe for even the shyest students to participate, which is a lifesaver in multi-level classes.
Another task that's just a blast is using communicative puzzles. Imagine taking a large, vibrant poster, cutting it up into 20 straight-edged pieces, and holding a group race to put it all back together. The catch? The students actually have to talk to each other to solve it. Actually, scratch that. You can make it even better. You can take the energy up a notch by blindfolding the person actually touching the pieces. That forces their partner to give crystal clear verbal instructions in real time. Just picture the absolute chaos and hilarity of this blindfolded puzzle race. The shouting, the urgent use of imperative forms, yelling stuff like, "Move it left, no, your other left, push it up." It's just a fantastic, high-energy way to bring the room to life and practice direct commands. Moving right along to Section 4, Real-World Prep.
A massive part of using English in the real world is mastering the fine art of small talk. It sounds simple, right? But culturally, it is actually quite complex. Mastering small talk requires navigating some very distinct categories of conversation. Acceptable, safe topics include things like the weather, sports, and non-controversial local events. These are fantastic because everyone can contribute without anyone getting angry. However, you must explicitly teach your students to avoid taboo topics like religion and politics. Bringing up a heated political debate is a remarkably fast way to ruin a casual real-world interaction. Similarly, they really need to learn to avoid TMI, or too much information. Detailing a recent graphic digestive issue to a total stranger at the bus stop? Yeah, that's definitely a conversation killer. Teaching these clear cultural boundaries is absolutely crucial for their social success outside your classroom. Another really cool tool for real-world prep is organizing a class survey. First, you review the basic question formats: who, what, where, when, why. Second, keep it simple. Teach them to use a simple scale, like strongly agree to strongly disagree, so strangers are actually more willing to participate quickly. And third, hit the pavement. Send your students out to a college campus, a local coffee shop, or a park to ask native speakers their survey questions. This forces authentic conversation in a very low-commitment setting. And the magic? That happens when they return to the classroom. The massive confidence boost a student gets when they realize a native speaker at a coffee shop actually understood them and happily answered their question is unparalleled. It's the ultimate why this matters moment for their language journey.
And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5, Objective Evaluation. Now, you might be thinking grading spoken language is purely subjective, right? Like either it sounds good or it doesn't. But the really great news is that you can give objective grades using a structured rubric. A proper speaking rubric relies on 6 core components: pronunciation, vocabulary, accuracy, which is their grammar, communication, which is their creative use of the language to be understood, interaction, meaning how they respond to their conversational partner, and fluency. By creating a 4-level scale for each of these distinct criteria, grading spoken English transforms from this weird guessing game into a highly structured, objective evaluation. Having this framework totally relieves the teacher's anxiety about accidentally showing favoritism or grading purely on vibes. You literally have a mathematical justification for their score.
I really want to zero in on one specific point from that rubric, though, and that's fluency. Fluency is the ease and comfort level of communication, and here is the kicker. It is entirely separate from grammatical accuracy. For a lot of teachers, this is a massive aha moment. A student can have absolutely terrible grammar, using the wrong verb tenses and dropping articles left and right, but still possess excellent fluency because they speak comfortably, smoothly, and without hesitation. On the flip side, a student might have totally perfect grammar, but lack fluency entirely because they pause agonizingly for 5 seconds between every single word.
Recognizing that distinction is incredibly empowering. It allows you to reward a student's bravery and flow, even if their mechanics are still a work in progress.
Well, we have definitely covered a ton of ground today in this explainer, from the crippling psychology of the silent classroom to strategic interactions, the boundaries of small talk, and even objective grading rubrics. You now have a really comprehensive toolkit at your disposal. So, what's it going to be? Which of these speaking activities will you use in your classroom tomorrow? I challenge you to pick just one tool from this kit, test it out, and watch your students transform from silent observers into confident communicators. Thanks so much for joining me today, and happy teaching.